Welcome back to another episode of In Case You Missed It this week in GovTech. It's been another wild week. It's like every week we're seeing more market activity, more innovation, more news stories to kind of tell to the market. So it makes our job a little bit easier to share the good news of what's going on in the GovTech market. So Jed and Joe, thanks so much for joining me again, and to our government technology audience, thanks for tuning in for another episode. All right. Well, let's start first with some of the breaking news. This came out yesterday in the market. As we've said before and talked at length, the mergers and acquisitions side of the GovTech market is probably the hottest it's ever been. This is really a positive indicator for market maturity. And for those of you in the public sector, what that means is you're getting new capabilities that are starting to integrate to allow you to have a more holistic approach with the platforms that you're using in the space. There's definitely this rise of the platform play. We saw that with NIC and Tyler, and that $2.3 billion deal. This was a great deal with rock solid technologies. They acquired a company called PrimeGov that was really around virtual meeting, live streaming, and those types of technologies front and center during the pandemic. We saw the need to do things virtually from a public meeting and legislative standpoint became no longer a nice to have. It was something that every single city across the country really had to get better at. And so they saw explosive growth with PrimeGov, landing them on our GovTech 100 list along with Rock Solid. Now, for those of you that don't remember Rock Solid, they merged with CitySource a few years ago. They provide citizen engagement, kind of CRM software that's really focused on this platform dynamic of engaging citizens all the way to the ERP side of things. So this is a really natural connection between two companies that are now taking that engagement kind of core focus and bringing that now to the edge of public meetings and being able to tap into that. Joe, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think it represents, like you said, another consolidation that we're seeing in this space, whether that's what we've seen over the years with Civic Plus and C-Click-Fix to the efforts of Granicus. And I think it was a week or two ago, we were talking about Granicus and NIC coming together. This represents two companies coming together that do a phenomenal job on the local government side. So it's really reinforcing that commitment to local government between Rock Solid and PrimeGov. It's going to be interesting to watch as this continues to mature.
And Jed, I know you've written about this at length in the past as well, and you've seen a lot of these kind of new market connections. I'd love to get your perspective on this one too.
Right. So what I've covered specifically is just the efforts and challenges of local areas trying to, keep up with their public meetings. They want to keep some consistency as far as doing business is concerned, but they're also very concerned about making sure that the public can still participate. And typically what ends up happening, or based on my coverage, is that a local area would pick a platform to do the public meetings, whether it be Zoom or something else. And then they would have to collect audience feedback through separate channels. So sometimes this could be as simple as having a waiting line for people to call in, and then they could record someone's message and then play it at the meeting. Some jurisdictions were using things like Facebook to collect audience feedback. And so that's why I think this news is very important, is because I think it'll make things easier for certain jurisdictions, because everything could be integrated rather than having to come up with different solutions for different parts of the process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so some notable moves too on this one. Tom Spengler, who was the executive chairman of PrimeGov, also notably of Granicus of the past, when before they were merged with Gov Delivery, will be taking over as CEO. So Rick Brown, the CEO prior to the acquisition, will be stepping into an executive chairman role. So some faces from the past will be stepping in. Excited to see what happens with this. Jed, we also had a major feature come out in GovTech, one of our big annual features. Tell us a little bit about the top 25 Doers, Dreamers, and Drivers for 2021.
So this is a list that, as you can see, we've been doing it for several years there. It goes all the way back to 2015 right there on the web. Maybe it goes back farther than that, I'm not sure, but that's the links that we have up there. But yeah, these are the 25 people that we feel have been making the biggest waves in government IT. And I interviewed a couple of people for this feature. So the first one that I interviewed was Lester Godsey, the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer of Maricopa County in Arizona. And it was really interesting talking to him, because he was talking about how cybersecurity has really changed when it comes to elections. It's not just about making sure that the elections are secure, and as far as the votes not being tampered with and things like that. He said he was also having to deal with a lot of disinformation and misinformation. And it's really interesting because he said throughout the year, last year in 2020, they learned new lessons with each election. And so they just kept on building on that over and over and over again. And so that was just a really interesting conversation to have with him. The other interview that I did was actually with Team Ohio. So that's John Husted, the Lieutenant Governor of Ohio, who is also the Chief Innovation Officer of Ohio, which is really fascinating in and of itself. But then I also talked to the CIO of Ohio, Irvin Rogers, and the two of these guys, they've just been doing incredible work. It seems like Ohio is always in the news about some sort of technology-related thing in government, and they just bring so much to the table. Really, it's all about the Innovate Ohio platform, which is basically trying to get all agencies on the same page as far as like data sharing, being in the cloud, and all sorts of other things. And so those two guys are really just doing great work.
Yeah, this had a list of some of the what I would almost call Hall of Famers in the GovTech space. Jim Weaver and Nelson Moe, others that have been really pushing the envelope for a number of years. Some standout ones to me, Brian Ben, the CIO of Atlanta Housing, really involved in the GovTech Special Districts program. Has really been a champion of using technology to solve some of these complex problems, tackling things like workforce and other things in his agency in a very innovative way. We also saw some other special districts like Lukman Fazal that are tackling transit and using technology in new ways. But I think, the standout to me here was the fact that, state and local government CIOs and technology staff are really called out, because really all of you deserve to be on this list, and you are, based on the efforts that you had in responding to the pandemic last year, but also the continued efforts into 2021 and beyond. Joe, any notable ones on here stand out to you?
No, you hit the nail on the head with that, looking at the technology staff. We joked for the better part of last year that the average CIO across the country felt like the Stretch Armstrong toy with the demands that were placed on them and their teams. And that doesn't show any sign of letting up, even as we continue to get these injections of funds and federal dollars that are flowing, but the budget constraints that exist in a number of jurisdictions as well means that 2021 is just going to be as active as we saw in 2020. And this list here represents some of the best and brightest that continue to push forward despite the circumstances that are placed upon them.
So make sure you check out the full list, govtech.com/top-25. Great list. We'll put some links in the actual show notes. And then Joe is back to talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. I know we were talking about kind of the coming of that, and that it just passed, actually, I think, on our last, in case you missed it. Joe, what are some notable things as you've had more time to kind of digest it?
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I feel like it's Jerry Maguire, right? Show me the money. And that's kind of what we've been doing lately from the federal government perspective, and then what it means to states and localities. So a lot here to like. Obviously, with the $350 billion in fiscal relief to states and localities, you can see the breakout here in the article. States themselves are receiving over $195 billion. That's going to go a long way in closing some of those budget shortfalls at the state level. And unlike what we saw in the CARES package, you got broader disbursements now into local government to provide that fiscal relief. So there's criteria here for cities and counties, but a lot of money is going to start flowing to those localities as well. Probably closer into the May timeframe is where we'll start to see these funds flow out. Funds for tribal governments, funds for territories as well. But beyond just the fiscal relief, you've got a topic that I know that Jed's covered in depth, and so is the GovTech team. That's unemployment modernization and the issues that we've seen around fraud, waste, and abuse. So states now are going to receive $2 billion through this package to modernize those systems and take steps to improve program integrity. But it's not just the federal funds. We're also seeing states pass funding for that as well. And probably outside of health and human services, the biggest winner here has to be education. You've got right about $130 billion to local education agencies to help reopen. In fact, $81 billion just started to flow out to states yesterday or the day before. So there was an announcement from the Biden administration. So the first big chunk of that money now is hitting the doorsteps of your state agencies that will pass on through to your local education school districts. You got funds here in terms of connectivity, over $7 billion rolling out through the FCC for schools and libraries to close the homework gap. And then when we get into health and human services, all year and last year, we've been talking about vaccines, distribution, communication, and the challenges. A lot of funding is going into testing, into the public workforce, and into improving and overcoming some of the challenges on the vaccine distribution side. So the whole article here will break out all of the opportunities, a lot of funding, but some ample opportunities here for technology, particularly around connectivity, public health, and education.
Yeah, this was an exciting one to follow. And I know, there's also some more broad buckets that are in here around, infrastructure improvements for water, sewer, and broadband that we're still waiting on some guidance from. And I think, Joe, last time we talked, we're looking, at some point before May, hopefully we'll get some additional guidance from the U.S. Treasury on that. We also know, as we talked last time, there's an emerging infrastructure bill that the Biden administration will propose in the coming weeks. It could be around the $3 to $4 trillion mark, depending on where they land. But some exciting news to see that local government, state government agencies are receiving direct aid. They can also deal with some of the revenue shortfalls of the pandemic. And also, even special districts, able to be a transfer agency. They'll have to get it from a city or from another eligible entity that's on there, but now explicitly called out within the legislation as being eligible. Jed, anything stand out to you on this as well?
Well, to touch on something that Joe mentioned earlier about the unemployment insurance aspect of this. So I recently talked to the commissioner of the Vermont Department of Labor, and I was talking to him about the different challenges that that they have faced and are still facing. And one thing that's really interesting about this bucket here is that states are not sure what kind of technology and what kind of modernization will be supported by this money. So it was just interesting talking to him from his perspective, because he wasn't exactly jumping up for joy just based on the number alone. He's just kind of taking a wait and see approach, because states have differences in their systems, and some of them don't necessarily want to go in certain directions with modernization. It all depends on what the tree looks like, so to speak. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see what kind of guidance the states get on what they can spend the money on, and which states will be able to take the most advantage of that.
Good point. I mean, I think that's an open question for a lot of these buckets, right? A lot of money and guidance still to be determined for a number of these buckets. So we'll continue to follow it both in government technology and with the Center for Digital Government. We want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your Friday to join us on this week's episode of In Case You Missed It. Join us again next Friday, same place, same time. Have a wonderful weekend and take care.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.